So, Amira, when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That is a good question. I don't remember wanting to be anything when I grew up. I do remember being at an ACLU shindig with my father and being quite young, 8, 9, 10, something like that, and someone asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said I wanted to marry rich, just to sort of annoy both my father and kind of shock everyone around me. But I always thought that was a difficult question. I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up because I hadn't experienced anything yet. And I guess I was a little jealous of people who actually knew what they wanted to be when they grew up, because I certainly didn't.
Well, what led you to study anthropology at Berkeley?
The love of people, finding people really interesting and curious. What else? My father is a professor of sociology, and again, I think I'm showing myself to be a little bit more of a rebel than I think of myself as, but I just couldn't follow in his footsteps. So anthropology might have been like something similar, something that I was cognizant of and brought up with in a way, but slightly different, going out on my own. What else? I find people fascinating. And so, being able to major in something where you can study people was pretty fun.
So was there anything before you discovered the Alexander technique that kind of predicted you would become a teacher of the Alexander technique?
I would say no. After I became an Alexander technique teacher, I was in the midst of a lesson, and someone was asking me something about my family, and it dawned on me that both of my grandmothers on my maternal side and my paternal side were healers of some sort, and in their own way. And although I consider myself a teacher rather than a healer, I think that my upbringing, the daughter of a professor, everything was about learning, combined with some background in genetic background. I don't know if you can even say that. In the healing profession, maybe that combination. But I'm really grasping at straws there, Yeah.
Oh, that was so interesting, yeah. That was interesting. So how did you become interested in the Alexander technique?
Pain, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a great job. I loved my job. I was a pretty high-level project manager in a corporation, and I got to fly all over the world running different projects, and had customers in different places, and it was great. But I approached it like I had approached everything in my life, with like this incredible drive and will and determination. And doing that at a computer for 10, 12 hours a day created a lot of pain in my physical body. Now I realize that it was sort of a mental, emotional pain as well, but at the time I just had physical pain and needed to do something about it. I waited way too long. I just powered through and ignored the pain for the first 2 years or so until it became unbearable, which I don't suggest anyone does. It's not the right path by any means, but I was really determined to do a good job in my work and serve my customers and really perform well, and that took precedence to my own health, which is sad now that I think about it, now that I look back on it. But that's really the way it was, and I got really lucky, and I happened across an Alexander technique teacher who was also a physical therapist, and I had been sent through the workers' comp program at the corporation that I worked at to the physical therapist, and he did this magic with his hands, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And I came home and I described it to my husband, and I hadn't gotten the name of what he was doing, but I remembered what he said to me. Let your neck be free, let your head go forward and up, let your back lengthen and widen. And I said that to my husband, and he's like, oh, that's the Alexander technique. And he had come across it in a improv movement acting dance world, which was not my world at all. And so from there I went online and I found an Alexander technique teacher, and I studied for about almost a year. And then it was time to make a transition in my life, and I decided to train to become an Alexander technique teacher. And I don't think I was a particularly good student. I read your little bio of yourself on your website, Luke, and how you said, you know, your teacher didn't think that you were really like connecting with it, and you thought it was great though. Yeah. Looking back, I would have fired me as a student, as a client, because I think I really came in every week because I really loved my Alexander technique teacher. I thought she was great, and I would talk to her, and I wasn't really paying attention, and I didn't really notice things, and I would try really hard to do what she said to do, but not by applying the technique, but simply by trying hard. But something must have gotten through to me. Some principle must have made sense. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made this decision. So there you go. That's my story.
Who was your first? Go ahead.
And now I don't have pain. I mean, I can create pain in myself very easily by doing all the wrong things. But most of the time, I work at the computer, do my life, sports, you know, hanging out, walking, talking, without any pain, which is just miraculous, I think. So, yeah. My first Alexander technique teacher, is that who you were?
Yeah.
Constance Claire Newman.
Oh.
She's a local teacher in Oakland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's also a physical therapist?
No, so I didn't go to, so the physical therapist, his name is Anthony Trudesco, Tony Trudesco, and he was studying to be an Alexander technique teacher, and he was in his last term or last year training, and so he still has his physical therapy job, and he still works as a physical therapist. But I only saw him once, but he planted the seed. I have him to really thank. He did the magic first.
And when did you start taking Alexander lessons? What year was this?
You're going to make me do math. I don't know. Let's see. Early 2000s. Can we just say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was before 9/11?
Yes, I believe it was. Yeah.
And how did you decide to train to become a teacher?
Well, I had left that job, the corporate job, and I had money saved, so I had taken a bunch of time off, and I was exploring different options for what I wanted to be when I grew up, even though I was an adult already. And and I knew I had the love, all the ideas that came to my mind were being in business for myself. So I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to run my own show. And I've always loved helping people, and I love teaching. You know, we learn best when we teach. So it just all came together as I was taking lessons. And it was a big leap into the unknown. But I did it. Also, when I went to visit the school that I ultimately trained in, there are two co-directors, and I met one of them before I trained, and Giora Pincus, and he's just a mensch of a guy, and he had this joyful personality and quality to himself that was so seductive. Not him, but the idea of being happy like that was incredibly attractive. I'd never really met someone who was so comfortable with themselves. So I think that pushed me over the edge as well.
So what was the 3 years of training like for you?
In what way?
Well, for me, the second year was the hardest. For other people, they go through, dark night of the soul, and what am I doing, and why am I here? And, we're doing the same thing over and over again. For others, I presume maybe it's different. So I was just kind of curious what it was like for you.
Sure. I didn't really have any darkness in my training. I had a lot of frustration, feeling like I wasn't getting it or that I wasn't good enough. But to me, those were points of growth and points of learning. There were also points of frustration, but I kind of looked at the frustration as places, as an area that I could grow from. But I think my biggest frustration was I wanted it to be clearer. I wanted it to be simpler, more straightforward. Just do this. Here are the keys to the kingdom, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And really, ultimately, subsequent to training, I got great training. I loved my training. Fabulous experience, joyful experience in many, many ways. But it wasn't the key to the kingdom. Like, it didn't say, do this, do this, do this. And so subsequent, as I've been teaching in my own practice, wanting to make it easier for my own students so that it doesn't have to take a lifetime to get the basics down and to really be able to implement it yourself, I've tried to figure out different ways of talking about the technique, and so I use different language and different analogies and different teaching tools. I've come up with a lot of different teaching tools, and I did that as a result of wanting to make it easier for myself. How can I reconceive of this so it's easier for me to implement, and easier for me to teach, and easier for people to learn? So I think the Alexander technique is a really fabulous base, but it wasn't the end-all, be-all for me. I had to do a lot of other things to make it work for me. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes. You mean the Alexander technique isn't the only thing in your life?
No, imagine that. Though in the beginning, I definitely thought it was. I did approach it as, if I just do this, everything will be fabulous. And I think it's seductive to look at it that way, because when you have a really good teacher who works with you and gives you this new kind of kinesthetic information, and your body responds to it, and you have this new experience, and you feel different, you think, oh, it must be simple. But I think people have worked on themselves for so long that that's what's getting communicated. That quiet calm gets communicated from their own system, and it's not as easy as just implementing the principles. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, the principles are true. You can implement them. You can make big changes. But the changes that you experience in a lesson are in part because the teacher has done a lot of work on themselves and is communicating that. And so therefore, when you're by yourself and you implement the principles, it's much more challenging. You're up against, like for me, I was always up against my overachiever side, right? That just wanted to end gain everything. And even stopping, I end gained to stopping, right? Which is ridiculous. So I had to come up with workarounds for myself to sort of break those habits in different ways that weren't necessarily the language of the Alexander technique. And then that helped me implement it.
So how much did you think during the 3-year training about setting up a practice? Did you only start thinking about that at the end, or was that on your mind all the way through?
So it was on my mind towards the end. Did one series of classes on writing a brochure, which was pretty much the only, at that time, I think that the training school has implemented different things subsequently, but at that time was the only business-oriented work we did. But it was enough to make me realize that it was hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has to be hard, but when it's sort of like faulty sensory appreciation. When you only know one way of doing it, you're stuck in that one way of doing it, and you can't see outside of that. And I think there are a lot of other ways of marketing oneself, but we get stuck in a little fixed loop, if you will. And I don't think it has to be hard. That's my current thinking on it. So at the time, I thought a lot about wanting to get my website up and done and everything set before I graduated, and I never did that. I waited until after I graduated.
So surely you looked around and saw that there are a lot of Alexander Technique teachers out there who didn't have many clients. And did you start thinking about that and how you're going to perhaps market things differently?
Yes and no. Well, I didn't dwell on the fact that people didn't have a lot of clients. I dwelled on the fact that it was totally possible. So maybe this is a little bit of revisionist history. The reality at the time was that my husband, when I graduated from Alexander Technique School, said, "Okay, I'm quitting my job," and I totally supported him doing that because it was time. He was burnt out, and I didn't want him to be miserable. But I had the fire in my belly. We had just bought a big house, and I wanted to be an Alexander Technique teacher. I did not want to go back to corporate cubicle land. Even though I had an office, it felt like corporate cubicle land, I just, no, I'm not going back. So I was going to do whatever it took to make it work. And I did. I worked my patootie off in that first year to really get my website up. It was different than it is now, but I got a website up. I thought a lot about what my website would look like. I looked at a lot of Alexander Technique teacher websites and realized that many of them were not attractive to me if I put myself in a potential student's shoes. So I started thinking about what kind of clients I wanted to attract. Not even at that time. I started thinking about what kind of image I wanted to present. And I knew I wanted it to be professional. I didn't want it to be airy-fairy. I didn't want it to be too woo-woo. Because this work is very practical, and I wanted people to understand that it was practical, implementable, and that I was a professional. And because I was a professional, I was worthy of being paid professional wages. And I realized that if I had a sort of homespun website that didn't look very professional, it would be harder to get paid what I wanted to get paid. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Did I go?
Yeah.
I have lots of thoughts on this. You can ask me anything on this because I've.
Great. I'm gonna keep asking you. Yeah. Let me follow up on what you were talking about. So I'm actually going to pause here for a second, inhibit, and actually think about what you said.
Okay.
What did you notice when you started describing the Alexander technique to people? I mean, after you started taking your first lessons all the way through your training, did you notice difficulties trying to convey what it was to people, and how did you think about that?
Okay, I'm going to answer that from my perspective now, and then I'll tell you how it actually was then. So my perspective now is that the Alexander technique world as a culture in and of itself, here's the anthropologist in me, the Alexander technique culture has seemed to set up this rule, this mindset, this cultural mores that says talking about the Alexander technique has to be hard and is challenging, and you can't use any of these words over here. Like, it helps your body, right? Or right? Or that it reduces pain. There's all these sort of rules out there that say, if we use the word pain relief, even if we say self-managed pain relief or something like that, that somehow that's bad or wrong. But so many of us got attracted to it because it did help us relieve our pain. Now, it did that through education, sure. It didn't do it through pills or surgery or physical therapy or whatnot. But it did do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be here, right? We would say, this is a bunch of hooey, and we would be doing something else. So I feel like there are a lot of rules that keep us from speaking easily about the work. The second thing that I think is that, I came to the technique because of pain. Not everyone comes to it because of pain. And not everyone has the same story with the Alexander technique. So I think part of our issue is we want to include everyone's story with our own when we talk about it. It's good for this and this and this and this and this. And that makes it very hard to talk to people about it. It's like too much to say in one mouthful sometimes. Or it sounds like snake oil. It helps this and this and this and this and this. And it's not snake oil, and it does help many things. But I think what makes it easy for me to talk about the Alexander technique is that I talk about my story, my experience, my version of the Alexander technique, the way I implement it, and what it's done for me, and the people that I like to work with. And that makes it really easy for me to talk to people about it. And I also, what I say, I don't have a pat response. I say what's up for me that day with that person in that particular instance. I'm very adaptable and spontaneous about that. Now, back in training, I think it was really challenging. And I came up with a lot of formulaic ways of talking about it. It helped a little bit, but it didn't make people want to come work with me.
Yeah.
Are you having is it hard for you to talk to people about that? What you're learning and the technique?
I'm not sure. It's somewhere between easy and hard. I mean, I'm not sure how effective I am. I think I'm really good with words. Mm-hmm. And yet this is an elusive subject, and one of the problems that I have is that many of the words that I use, such as the Alexander technique uses, have been taken by so much of California society that it sounds like some New Age tree-hugging yoga thing. Mm-hmm. Like when you talk about becoming aware and acting consciously and all that stuff.
Right.
Like our times are shared with so many other disciplines that they're meaningless to many people. And I also don't have a true test of how effective I am at communicating the technique, because I'm not sure that anyone's ever gone for a lesson, even though I've been talking about this for more than 3 years now. Mm-hmm. So if it's true that nobody's gone for an Alexander lesson after I've been talking about this for more than 3 years, then I would, rate my abilities to communicate the technique as a failure.
Mm-hmm. So you don't really know.
Yeah,
okay.
So I think I'm good, I think I'm comfortable, and people seem intrigued, but I'm not sure anyone's gone and booked a lesson. Mm-hmm. And so I'll find out a lot more when I graduate in 3 weeks, and then, I'll really get an idea how good I am at communicating this stuff.
Right. And I would just challenge you to, instead of looking at the fact that so many disciplines use the words awareness and consciousness, and consciousness raising even, as a positive, that people know what that means already. So you don't have to explain, you don't have to start from square one. Now, you do have to sort of redefine it in terms of what the Alexander technique is, what it means for us. But it's actually quite helpful, I find, that when people have some sort of context to put it in, and then you've got them a little bit and you can kind of guide them. Well, it's more like this, or it's more like this. And because I feel like one of the challenges that the Alexander technique has is that it's not very well known, and it doesn't fit like a particular slot in people's head. Like if you said physical therapy, everyone, even if you've never done physical therapy, you have like this little slot in your mind, physical therapy, or acupuncture, or yoga, or whatever. Even if you've never done these things, you kind of know what they are. And we don't have that. So if you can latch onto a little slot, and then redefine it once you're there, it might not be such a bad thing.
Yeah. What was the biggest challenges that you faced in establishing a practice?
Feeling comfortable charging enough. Yeah. So when I first was setting my rates, I had this incredibly low rate that I was going to start off at because, the teachers who had been teaching for years locally were only charging, a certain amount for a session, and I couldn't possibly charge more than they did. And also, I didn't have a practice, so I might as well make it really low to get people in. And, and I was so lucky because I had a friend who was smart about business, and he said, Hui, you're this, you have all of these unique gifts. It's going to be so much harder to raise your prices later. You need to charge this. But it's more than what so-and-so charges. Who cares? They're not charging enough. And that was a breakthrough for me. I have to admit, that was the hardest thing, setting my prices. But having someone say, just do it, and not having the roof fall in and actually getting clients was great. So I encourage anyone, any Alexander Technique teacher listening to this, or any trainee listening to this, set your rates high. We're all undercharging.
Yeah. What did you find were the biggest challenges transmitting the Alexander Technique to your students?
Teaching it, do you mean?
Yeah.
Sort of where to start. There's so many places, there's so much sort of base knowledge that you need to be effective that I wanted to, get people up to speed the fastest. So I think in the beginning, I taught in a very traditional way, and it worked. It was great. But now I kind of do a much more holistic I add in other pictures, other ideas, other concepts that help people get at some of the concepts that we're trying to get at. And I think that's a really helpful, good initial base. And I know a lot of teachers would say, well, then you're not teaching the Alexander technique, and because you're not going, strictly by the book. But I would disagree. I think what I'm doing is giving people the tools with which to understand the principles of the Alexander technique. And if you keep saying it in the same way and people don't get it, then you should try saying it in a different way so that people do get it. So I don't know if that was a challenge for me, because I guess the challenge, if I were to articulate it, is the challenge for me was that people only got so much when I was teaching it in this sort of strict constructionalist kind of way. And I very intuitively and naturally started to, try different things to help them understand the concepts and the principles.
Yeah.
And that was useful. That helped me be a better teacher, and they got so much, they learned quicker, faster, deeper because of that. So I think the challenge was, am I a renegade? Am I not teaching the Alexander technique? The sort of mental, neurotic thinking, the internal critic saying, what are you doing? That's not how you were taught to teach. But I do very much teach traditionally, but I add stuff to it to make it more effective, I think, quicker to grasp. And it works, so I've gotten over it. Yeah.
Do you give your Do you give your students any exercises to take home and do?
I write notes out for my students after each lesson, and that's something I wish I had during my training and previous in my one-on-one lessons. And the notes are just little reminders. In the beginning it might be sort of where the top of your spine is and where the bottom of your spine is. And, if you call, occasionally think to the top of your spine as you're walking an exercise, then yes, I give exercises. But they're more think about this, or, give yourself a little grounding by, letting yourself rest on your bones, right? Things like that.
Yeah. And
I think of the lying down practice as an exercise in a way. I mean, it's not a, muscular muscle building exercise, but it's a practice. So I do ask my students to practice. Yeah. But I do it very intuitively and very individually, so that what I tell to one student is different than what I tell to a different student, because everyone's an individual, and so a one-size-fits-all doesn't make sense. But I come up with places in their lives that it makes sense for them to practice this work. And sometimes we develop that together. Does that answer the question?
Yes. How do you find yourself reacting when people have been teaching the technique longer than you have, start telling you that you're not teaching the technique?
No one's ever said that to me, but now I've outed myself and World Wide Web, so maybe I'm going to get some commentary back. I'm not sure. But no one's ever said that to me, and quite frankly, I guess what I would say is I tell my students up front when they come to work with me that I teach the Alexander technique plus, right? That I integrate a lot of my own, teaching tools that help you with the Alexander technique, and that it's not straight up Alexander technique. And if that's what you want, I'm happy to refer you to other teachers. There are plenty of teachers in the Bay Area. And so I'm upfront with my students, and in fact, I've taken my work further, where I do a lot of coaching and strategy work with people, because for me, what I discovered was that it was very hard for me to effectively implement the principles of the Alexander technique when I was in complete overwhelm in my life, or driving myself too hard, or not, sort of stuff that wasn't about letting my neck be free physically, per se, in the moment. How do I say that? It's all us in the moment, so it is the Alexander technique, but it's sort of a broader definition of it. So let's say one of my students is having an issue with their boyfriend, who doesn't want to be in the relationship with them anymore, and it's causing them to physically come in on themselves. I don't do any therapy. I'm very clear with people that I'm not a therapist, but we strategize around, well, what's the trigger there, and why is that causing you to come in on yourself? And what could you do in your life that doesn't have anything to do with your neck being, like starting with neck free, but starting with, okay, let's not open your emails from him, right? I don't know. I'm making an example, okay?
Yeah.
And before you open your email, that's the moment to take a moment to stop, inhibit, send your directions, conceptualize how you would like to respond, and then open your email. Totally made up that example.
Yeah.
But I do a lot, people's lives become overwhelming, and then they can't even consider applying these principles. And of course, these principles are supposed to be applied to every situation. So, I could see the other argument to what I'm saying, but I go at it from a very practical perspective oftentimes. And so I tell my students that I do sort of life coaching type strategy in conjunction with the Alexander technique to make it more effective. And they love it. So if an Alexander
go ahead.
teaching for 50 years comes and tells me I'm doing it wrong, I would say, okay, but I'm effective and people are doing a great job, and I do teach the Alexander technique. So there you go.
Has a student ever said, oh, yes, please give me a referral to someone who, teaches only the Alexander technique?
Wait, say that again, Luke. I couldn't understand you.
Yes, has any student ever said, oh, give me a referral to someone who only teaches the Alexander technique?
No, absolutely not. But I also, this is another marketing strategy for you. I'm just sharing as much as I can with you. I mean, I could talk for hours. In the beginning, I did packages of lessons, but they were, buy 10, get 2 free kind of things. And that was great. But now I do packages of all the things that I work on with people. And I don't teach just one lesson at a time. You have to buy a package, and I don't want to go into all the details of what's in my packages, but you have to buy a package to work with me. And so oftentimes people are like, well, I just want to come for lessons. And I have to say, well, that's not how I work. I don't find it as effective to just do it that way. It's been effective for many other people, and there are many Alexander technique teachers that work that way. So if you would like me to refer you to someone, I'm happy to. But the way I have found that people make the fastest, quickest, most effective, most long-lasting changes is by working in this way. And so that's how I work now. And so, people do ask for referrals, and I point them to AMSAT Online, to the teacher listing there, and to particular teachers if I'm feeling like certain ones would be really good for them. But 9 times out of 10, they come back to me. So I think coming at it from a sense of security and knowing that I'm a really good teacher and that my students make amazing, profound changes in their lives gives me that confidence. And so if people want to work with someone, I also believe that people work with the right person. Like there's some universal thing that matches us up with the right people. So if they need to work with someone, that's perfectly fine. That's just the way it's supposed to be.
How did your current website come about?
Yeah, so my previous website was very clean and light, if you will, lots of white space. But it didn't have very many pictures, photos. Had some. And how did my current website come about? I felt like it needed to be more vibrant. So I put more pictures together. And then I really believe what I'm doing is teaching people how to create the life they want, not just get out of pain, physical pain, that is, but how to really have their ideal life. I know that sounds like so grandiose, but when we look at what we're doing is helping people change habits that are no longer serving them, we're helping them create the life they want. So that's how the title of my website came to be. And then I felt like I had to be a little bit more speaking to my niche market, which is people who have pain, feel pressure, and want to do something about it. I recognized that when I looked at the people who I really loved working with, they were people who were like me, who were previously like me, kind of driven, overachiever types that thought if they worked really hard at something, they were going to get it. And they really needed the paradigm shift of that working in a different way and not as hard, but working easy, actually does work and propels them forward. So I tried to speak with that kind of language in my website. So I thought a lot about who my ideal peeps are, who I love working with. And I really wanted, so a couple quick tips. Speak benefits, not features. Everyone says that, but it's really true. Don't talk about what you do for them. Talk about what they're going to get when they work with you. And I think one of the rules we have in the Alexander Technique world that I think needs to be broken is that we can't talk about what people get out of it because we can't guarantee it. Well, surgery doesn't guarantee that it fixes you. Pain pills don't guarantee that they fix you. Everyone talks in this way. And I just feel like within a certain range, we can too. And so I talk benefits. What are they going to get from working with you? They're going to feel great. It's going to expand their way of thinking. I don't know what your experience with the technique is, but speak to the kind of experiences you've had that you think people will get from working with you. And know that your website will morph and change over time, right? After you work and are teaching for a year, tweak it. Tweak it again, tweak it again, tweak it again. My website has certainly evolved over the years that I've been teaching it. Change it probably on a monthly basis. Not the grand design, but the text, parts of it. So another thing that evolved was the idea of giving people something when they come to my website in exchange for signing up for my newsletter. And I wrote, are you on my newsletter list?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I will be soon.
Okay, well, there you go. So I send out a weekly newsletter. And it used to be monthly, and now it's weekly, most of the time, if I'm on it. And I wrote a pretty significant, it's lots of white space, lots of, pictures, but a pretty significant ebook. It's about 50 pages. And at the time, I was going for a slightly different target audience than I am right now, but it's called Improve Your Posture, Relieve Your Pain, 10 surprisingly simple steps you can take now. And I have a graphic of a book with that title on it. And they get that as a free download if they sign up for my newsletter list. And they can unsubscribe to my newsletter list immediately if they want. But most people love what I write, and they stay on it and they read my stuff. And I was so surprised by how effective this has been that I can't encourage you enough to do something like this. It doesn't have to be 50 pages. In fact, I know I'm about to write a new version that's shorter, that's on a different, has a different framework to it, different content entirely.
Yeah.
Because I think 50 pages is too long. But when I was doing this is back to the sort of lack mentality about do I charge enough or whatever when I was first starting out. When I wrote this, I thought, oh my God, I have to make it really, really good, to make people want to get it and give me their email address. And I think you don't have to spend the 3 months it took me to work on that. Right? It can be a much simpler project. But I think what it does is position me as an expert and gives them a lot of free, wonderful, useful information that they can start implementing immediately. And then they're on my newsletter list, and they get my newsletter, and they get to know me and like me and trust me, and then eventually they call me up and ask for a lesson, right? So that is something new with this version of the website. Did that all make sense?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. And so I see that, people, depends on the week, but people sign up for that. Whereas before, people would come to my website and then leave, and then, the next thing would catch their eye, and they would never think to come back again. But now I'm in their inbox with valuable information, by the way. It's not just fluff that I send out. So it seems to be working.
So you were on a panel at the last AMSAT conference about how to, what was it was about how to get your practice going, how to market your practice?
It was actually, yes. It changed to something around social media and marketing, and that, I tried to get off that panel 3 times, thinking that I wasn't the right person for that panel. So I did stand up there, and I think what I talked about was really making, when you do your marketing and your website, to really know who your people are and to connect in an authentic way with them, and to not try and be someone else, but be yourself but speak to your audience. Yeah.
What did you find interesting about participating in that panel?
Well, I didn't know exactly how much information or what people wanted or why exactly I was there. So it was slightly confusing, even though they communicated all of that. It just wasn't. I wasn't clear. Nothing to do with anyone else. And so that's always confusing. I think I would love to run a 3-hour workshop for Alexander Technique teachers on marketing, because I have done so much thinking about it and research and investing in learning from business coaches and all of that, that I would love to share it. But that wasn't quite the right format. 10 minutes to do that wasn't the right format. 10 to 15 minutes, I think, is what we had to speak about. But there's so much to know. Yeah. Do
your fellow Alexander teachers ever complain to you about not having enough clients, or what do they complain to you about if they do?
I've never had anyone complain about that. I don't know if that's because I'm not in contact with people who have that issue, or if that everyone I know is putting their best foot forward, right, and not talking about it. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I guess most of the Alexander teachers I know complain about not having enough clients and like this. But I guess we attract different types of people.
Yeah. So definitely, Luke. So here's something that I would say is a cultural moray in the Alexander world, that it's really hard to get clients. It's really hard to start a practice. And I would just encourage you to throw that out, because all that's doing is pulling you down. I mean, how does it feel when you think that? What do you notice in yourself?
Oh, I was going down. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so why think that? Okay? Now, someone else might say, well, that's because that's the reality of the situation. But is it actually helping you? Does that help you take action, or does that just throw you into a fear reflex? And I would say it's the latter. And is it, and maybe framing it, I have to learn how to get clients, would be a much better way of stating the problem, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't cause, or I am learning how to get clients, right? Try that on. How does that pull you down, or does that is that an easier reaction?
Yeah, that's a much easier thought on me.
Yeah. So if for you and anyone else out there who ever listens to this complete interview, I think that the messages that we send ourselves are so powerful, and is it hard? I'm not going to say it didn't take any work, but if you think of it as fun, if you think of the marketing as part of your job and fun, then it's not work, then it's not hard, right? If you think of it as, this is not part of the Alexander technique, and I shouldn't have to market myself, then it becomes hard.
Do you think it's okay for us to tell our students and potential students that this will most likely make you feel great?
So the way I frame it is, I say, what I teach people how to do is start recognizing when they go into patterns that are causing them pain, and how to start shifting out of that. And when you start recognizing these patterns and start making these shifts on a regular, consistent basis, you stop creating the pain. Is it foolproof? No. Does it work? Yes. Are you going to move in the right direction? Absolutely. Will you feel great immediately? Well, some people do. It blows my mind. But for a lot of people, it takes some time to really practice this and keep it going and make it a consistent practice. But it's a whole paradigm shift, and you are engaged, and you're part of the process. And to make it work, you have to participate in the educational process, right? You have to learn. But yes, it's absolutely possible to feel great. Does that seem, when you said like that, does that make more sense?
Yeah. I have a rebellious attitude, so when my teachers keep telling me, we're not here to make people feel good, we're here to teach them, and don't try to recreate the feeling, try to recreate the thinking, I rebel against that. And so I was just kind of curious how other people deal with that, because I think this stuff makes you feel great.
Yeah. Right? So, and they're right. You don't want to have people think about this feeling and try and recreate that feeling. But that doesn't mean that they don't ultimately feel great by changing their thinking, right? And are you in the business of education? Absolutely. But are you also in the business of helping people feel great? Yes, because why else would you be doing this, right? I mean, I guess some people do it because simply the art of mastery. I don't know. If it wasn't to feel good, maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know. I'm sure that there are lots of someone who's more astute would be, well, people do it for this reason, this reason, and this reason. But I think most people come because something's not working for them that makes them feel poorly, and they would like to feel differently. Now, does that happen by changing your thinking? Yeah, it does. But the ultimate result is that you feel better.
So
Am I
do
so
you
off?
use? Yeah, I get it. Do you use traditional Alexander language in your lessons? Language such as inhibition, language such as stop and say no.
Yes and no. For the first 3-4 years, I did almost exclusively. I used that language. Now I use it part of the time, less and less. I lend people, as part of my programs, I lend people books that clearly describe that language. So I feel comfortable that they're getting some of the basics from the book learning. And I use different words to get at inhibition, because I find that people's eyes glaze over when I use that word. But I do use it. I use many other words, though. Stop and rest, stop and release, take a moment here. Could you pause for a minute? Let's just take a moment, right? I mean, there's all sorts of ways at getting at stopping, right? I use the word stop. Okay, take a moment to stop. And that seems to work a lot better than inhibition. That's the big one that makes people's eyes kind of glaze over, I find. But it's a great word also. So, I mean, I wouldn't discount it by any means.